All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today I'm joined by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well. Thank you.
Right on. So today's podcast, we're going to take a little dive down the annals of history. Annals? You know, it's annals of history.
We're just going to have a history lesson today. Let's just avoid that one.
Today we're going to read about Meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
I really dig your book. It's cool. I like that.
So everybody, digital here. Everybody has seen, Gladiator. Mm-hmm. So we know who Marcus.
Maximus Decimus Meridius Dessicus.
Right. So Marcus Aurelius is a gentleman in history in the Roman Empire. We're going to get into it today, talk about him and his meditations, which are really a discussion on, I know it's going to get a little bit, it's interesting, but these are kind of his writings, what he thought. He was quite the general, warrior, leader of military at a time in Rome that was pretty spectacular. He's a pretty renowned figure, heroic type figure in history, and also a philosopher of sorts. And in his meditations, you get insight into some pearls of wisdom from a great leader. And we're going to get into that today. So before we do that, I want to ask all of you that are listening, if you like the show, you like what we're doing, as always, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're checking it out on YouTube, if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, we just want to say thank you. Use the code GRITTY over at Stealthy Nutrition. Get yourself some CBD oil. Get yourself a glassing pad, rifle cover from Stealthy if you don't have one already. And go to Peaks if you're in need of some trekking poles. We got the new Peaks Backcountry Duo headlamp, which is, I think, one of the best for hunters out there. And use the code GRITTY. Get yourself some gaiters over at Peaks. And then also our friends over at Mountain Ops. If you need some supplements, a little pick-me-up, a little bit of, energy, I like the new Yeti mode.
Okay, so what I love about this, Brian, is like the warning signs that they felt necessary to put there. So, warning, high stimulant, warning, pre-workout.
Look, it is a little bit of a boost, but I like it. It's been effective, I'll say to say the least.
It's pink lemonade. That's not the flavor text that I was getting out of this.
Yeah, it's got the Yeti on the top, like a little Yeti monster Wolverine looking thing. But yeah, it says, it's got some pick me up. If you're out there drinking Monster or some of that, like try this.
Use this. Then you can just walk through doors. You won't have to open them anymore.
So that's at Mountain Ops. Use the code GRITTY over there. If you need a merino top or something like that, Mountain Ops also has some basic merino layers that I really like, and then they got some good workout clothes. Just go check out Mountain Ops.
How do you not wear those 24/7?
Go to mountainops.com and just shop around and use the code GRITTY. There's lots of products over there that you could fancy. And then here, Brent, I got one.
You found it.
There's a Dark Energy Poseidon battery bank right here that I have been using. This is the newer version. It's got a little built-in light. Yeah, it's indestructible. You can run it over. It's
we know that one for a fact.
Yeah. You can run this thing over. You can drop it in a creek and leave it in the creek. It's
dustproof,
waterproof, shockproof. I mean, I just can't recommend these enough. So at Dark Energy, use the code GRITTY over there, and for all your power banks. I mean, feel the weight for the weight and power, durability. I mean, this is kind of, to me, just the go-to for now.
You could brain an animal with that thing, dude.
Yep. All right, let's get into this book, Brent. I'm just going to start reading this. So Marcus Aurelius is one of the most noble of the Roman emperors, but his importance goes far beyond his role in the policies and history of an empire. His book of Meditations was written to himself, which is what we're going to go over today. It has proven to be an enduring legacy, a reflection of an ethical life as applicable today as it was almost 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius present the culmination of the most creative current of Greek religious thought, Stoicism, and its belief that God is one, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, all-just. True happiness lies in our recognition that all things happen in accordance with the will of God. We thus accept our roles in life and the events that happen to us, secure in our own inner fortress of self-knowledge. The wise man, like Marcus Aurelius, is self-sufficient. Wisdom lies in understanding that we cannot control, that we can control only our minds, what we think with our minds, and our actions based on those thoughts. This is really in line with Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl as well, where he says, in concentration camps as a Holocaust survivor in Auschwitz, he lost everything. Like the Germans had taken away, the Nazis had taken away everything, all liberty gone. What was the one thing they couldn't take away from him was his thoughts. Like no matter what they do, the one thing that he still has control over is his will and his thoughts. And he says wisdom lies in Marcus Aurelius, wisdom lies in understanding that we can control only our minds, meaning that you can't control the weather. You can't control tragedy. You can't control, how a hunt is going to go, right? Like you can't control everything. At the end of the day, what you really can control, the only thing that you have full power over is your mind. And we're going to get more into that. We can control our minds and what we think with our minds and our actions based on those thoughts. So it's like as a man thinketh kind of idea, right? Okay. The writings of Marcus Aurelius have had relevance through the ages. These writings spoke profoundly to such thinkers of the 18th century as Thomas Jefferson, who believed that a book of ethics comparable to the New Testament could be compiled from the writings of Marcus Aurelius. The Meditations inspired people ranging from entrepreneurs such as Cecil Rhodes to Matthew Arnold, a poet who spent much of his life attempting to reform the schools of England. This work can represent a source of meditation for even the busiest contemporary CEO. The Meditations are forever a call to duty. Marcus Aurelius himself saw them as a call to carry out the meaning of his life as God had given it to him. Okay. He says, it says, Marcus Aurelius was born to wealth and power in the vast Roman Empire of the 2nd century AD, in which Greek and Latin were the common languages, the one coinage was Roman money, and the law of Rome protected its people and property. The father of Marcus Aurelius died young, and Marcus was adopted by his uncle and guardian, the Emperor Antonius Pius. Marcus had wanted to be a philosopher. The term philosopher referred to love of wisdom. It was not a narrow academic specialty, but the search for wisdom needed to live one's life, much like what Socrates said. Following the death of Antonius in 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius became emperor. It was the duty of the emperor to protect individual rights and privileges, to create peace and prosperity for Rome, and govern this one world, the unrivaled superpower of its day. So this is about it was 160 days after Christ's death. As emperor, that's not very long, right? I mean, you're talking who was alive 150 years ago? It was before Theodore Roosevelt, a little bit before then. But it wasn't that long ago, in contemporary times for us. So it says, as emperor, Marcus Aurelius spent much of his life campaigning to protect the borders of Rome. He wrote his meditations actually called Thoughts for Myself in the evenings in his tent. So you remember in like Gladiator how he's in the tent before they do these battles at the borders. He's taking on Germanic tribes of people, and in the movie. So picture that setting, and he's writing these things in his tent as emperor. The great theme of the Meditations is the meaning of life. To arrive at the meaning of life, Marcus Aurelius began with God and fate. He believed that God exists, and that even an intensely irritating person is part of that same God, as has the same divine spark. So this is very much in line with Christian theology, that all men are created equal, and that we are all, because we all have that divine spark, because we all come from that same being, because we all are in essence created by God, that we all have value no matter what. Each person has a soul, and that soul partakes of the essence of God. Socrates said 2,000 years before this, I think it was, said something similar, where he was saying, you have a daimon inside of you, like your soul, and that soul, transcends your physical body and so on. So these are kind of old ideas, right? This is what he's saying. He believed that God exists, and that even the most irritating or even evil person is part of that same God and has a divine spark, just like you. Each person has a soul, and partakes of the essence of God. Fate, through God, has decreed a destiny for everyone. The writings, that's very Greek right there. The writings of Marcus Aurelius represent the development of a theme found in Homer. The Zeus of the Iliad has transitioned from being a capricious and lecherous king to being a god of wisdom. So a lot of the Greek mythology, when you're talking Zeus, they have all the power of like a god, but they have all the weaknesses and foibles of humanity. And then the gods do all these, make all these big mistakes and damage each other and act badly, even though they have massive amounts of power.
The Greek gods are always weird to me, because it always felt like I was watching some high school drama with super powered kids.
Right. Exactly. And later what you have with, the birth of Christianity and other types, you have a god of wisdom rather than these gods like Zeus in the Iliad, right? These spiteful gods that, when they don't get their way, like humans are the playthings
malevolent.
of them. The Stoics, who played a major role in this transition, taught that God is the universe and is all good, all beneficent, and all-knowing. They too believe that God gave each individual a soul and decreed a particular fate for each individual. This monotheistic idea paved the way for Christianity. Instead of there being all these gods, there's one God, which is what Marcus Aurelius is really kind of warmed up to himself. He says, a person might believe that, let me see. Okay, so he says this. He believed that a fate that had been laid down for each one of us, and that all individuals must work out their own destinies. Whether an individual believed in order or atoms was irrelevant. A person might believe that order existed in the universe, or that the universe consisted of random collision of atoms. So meaning that there was a God, or maybe there wasn't a God, or this is one big cosmic accident, or it's not, or there's some meaning behind it. He's saying whether you're basically an atheist or a deist, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, kind of doesn't really matter. He says that belief, however, does not change how one should live. Whether you come from one side or the other, he's like, doesn't really matter. Which I find interesting, his take on this. He says, Marcus believed that both good and evil exist in the world, and that wisdom lies in understanding that every person is a vehicle for doing good. All that a person can control is his or her own mind, the thoughts of that mind, and the actions taken on the basis of those thoughts. What I think is interesting is how we'll get into this a little more, but he's like, whether you believe in order or atoms, it's irrelevant. The course forward is still the same. To be a good person, to understand that it shouldn't change how you live.
It's funny because you look at Christian apologists and they're on that same string. But if you look at people like Sam Harris, he still, does not believe in God. But he still pushes for that same thing, like do good.
I think that there's a disconnect there in terms of the foundation for that philosophy doesn't make sense to me without a God. Okay, because you go back to Darwinian type ideas where it's just evolution. Whatever you can do to win or get ahead is what matters. Without, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, when he says, without God, anything is permissible. The same thing in George Orwell's 1984. When you see societies or human beings abandon the idea of God, or that we're all like have a divine spark in us, or that all men are created equal, you devalue human life. Like, you look at Putin invading Ukraine, and I just look at a man who does not value other human life at all. Like, whether it's his own soldiers or the Ukrainians, they're all just bags of meat to get to some means to an end. It doesn't care. He doesn't look at each person as intrinsically valuable, because they have a divine potential in each one of them. And so in that case, anything is permissible. There is no restraint. Like, under that ideology, you could say Putin's doing everything he needs to do to build a better world order down the road, right? All the lives needed, all the blood spilled to get to this ends is worth it. Now, I believe the opposite, that the means matter more than the ends. Like, I understand the goal, but if you have to compromise morality, and you have to compromise your duty to respect a person's freedom, to give a person their life, if you have to compromise that in order to meet your ends, you've lost before you even started. I think it's many the justification of an authoritarian tyrant, for their actions, to say, "Oh, I'm doing this because I'm going to make the world better, but I'm going to kill millions of people to get there."
Yeah, because the ends justify the means.
Yeah, and at that point, you've already lost before you started, and never once has that ever actually led to a better world. It never does.
No, it just creates more sorrow.
So I believe often, like I've heard Peterson talk about this, it's really sort of an excuse, a justification to say it's benefiting, but it really isn't. Like, it's a way of often he said when he was younger, he was going down this road of socialism, and he was drawn to people who were like, I'm so worried about the poor and the lower class and all these people that need money and blah, 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 or need a future, right? And he's like, they're so concerned. Then later what he found was most of the time they were saying, these rich people just need them to have their things taken away. And these rich people, it's not fair, And what he found was the real motivating factor, they didn't actually care about the poor people. They just wanted to tear down the wealthy people. And that it's not actually born, most of socialistic behavior isn't really born out of a concern often for the poor like they pretend. It's really born out of a jealousy and resentment toward the successful. And it's just a cover for that bad behavior. What did Elon Musk say the other day? Something in regards to wokeism. At the heart of wokeism is really just division, divisiveness, and a cover so that you can, in the name of diversity or in the name of caring about social justice, you can actually be, and you can actually, with that cover, do horribly racist and misogynistic things. Anyway, back to the book. All that a person can control is his or her own thoughts of the mind, and that actions taken on the basis of those thoughts. The mind must be trained. Meditation and contemplation rather than books lead to understanding. How often do you read something? Oh, that was really great, but you don't actually meditate on it and implement it.
It's a 50-50, to be honest. I do find I have to go into it beforehand knowing that's the plan.
Yeah.
Like when I go into it, I have to think like there's 10 or 15 minutes set aside after I read this chapter for me to sit and think about it. Mm-hmm. And also marking up books helps me out with that a lot. Because if I just mark stuff up as I go, then when I go back afterwards to like do the pondering and the contemplating, it's much easier for me to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very
that's
common.
Rare. That's like maybe 2 books a year I do that with.
Right. It's he says meditation and contemplation rather than books leads to understanding. So, I mean, the books are important. The ideas flow out of those. But the internalization, the meditation, the contemplation of those ideas is really where the absorption, the truth is understood. You know?
When I think of that, though, Brian, I think about people don't like being alone with their thoughts. A lot of people, that part right there is almost scary. Mm-hmm. Nowadays age, I don't like, if I don't want to, I don't ever really have to think. I can consume media. I can listen to music. I can listen to audiobooks. That's
what I'm saying. Like, there's all this consumption, but no action.
Yeah. No
introspection. No, like, I'm going to apply this now. Mm-hmm. And partly because, like you said, there's just an onslaught of endless amounts of content you can consume.
Mm-hmm. And when you can't consume it, you gain anxiety. Like, I don't have cell reception or internet right now. And it's been like 3 hours and I'm stressing out about it.
You know what I think it really helps me is...
walking out in the woods for 2 weeks at a time?
Well, that helps. But also, I produce. Like, I strive to create something to put out. And I say this to my kids. I don't want you to be a net consumer. Mm-hmm. I want you to be a net producer. Like, I want, when you look at all the things you take into your life and all the things you put out, I want you to be a sort of person that puts good things into the world, not one that just sits back and just takes things out of it, you know? And creating a film or a podcast or something, that's a process of creation rather than consumption. So you want that balance. It says, back here again, it says, actions of other people do not harm an individual. What matters is the individual's opinion of that action.
Read that again, would you?
Actions of other people do not harm an individual. What matters is the individual's opinion of that action. No one can control the mind of another person. An individual has been harmed only if he believes that he has been harmed.
I agree.
People have no true control over their own property, other people, or even their own reputations. This is just Stoicism, like philosophy of the Stoics. Mm-hmm. You know, Tim Ferriss refers to this a lot. It's been a real life-saving set of ideas for him, you know, as he's more atheist than anything. But these ideas gave him some grounding. People have no true control over their own property, other people, or even their own reputations. God controls events. It's very much fatalistic in some ways. He is like the pilot of a great ship who has let a person out on shore. When he calls, the person must return to him. Another idea found in the Meditations is that everything that happens is good because God would not allow something to happen if it were not good. Everyone has a duty to perform. Marcus, who wanted to be a philosopher, had a duty as emperor. His role was to perform that duty as well as possible, because God called him to perform that duty. After death, a person turns into atoms and vanishes. A person is a mere individual, an atom in the universe. The soul does not endure. Glory does not matter. What matters is whether an individual has performed his assigned duty to the best of his ability. The only reason for studying the great books is that they present absolute values for living life. These values, according to both Marcus Aurelius and Socrates, include the following. Truth. Truth is an absolute value. Some things are true in all places and times. Resisting evil, for example, is always right. Justice. Justice consists of treating others as one would wish to be treated. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Courage. Courage means standing up for justice. Moderation. Nothing should be carried to excess. And wisdom. Wisdom enables a person to know what justice is, to recognize when courage is required, and to do what is right. These values, which are found in the literature of classical India and classical China, as well as contemporary literature, were, for Marcus Aurelius, the way to live life to find freedom. Education is ultimately freedom from worry about the world and from the fear of death. According to Marcus Aurelius, a fear of death implies wisdom in an area that people know nothing about. Death is as natural as life. For Marcus Aurelius, everything could be understood in terms of God, fate, and the central values. Justice was the essence of his role as emperor. He believed that power, honor, and ambition were false ideas and led people astray. Power, honor, and ambition were false ideas. Power, for example, is ultimately unimportant. The desire to have power, obtain it, and maintain it is a false goal, because power vanishes after death. Marcus Aurelius dreamed of an empire in which individuals were free to live life as they chose and to follow their ambitions. He stated, "I dream of one world in which all are prosperous and all can take care of their children, and in which there is no war." In addition, he believed that the world is beautiful and is full of God's glory. The philosophy found in the Meditations can be summarized as follows. Get out of bed, get on with your duty, and appreciate what is around you. That is the meaning of life. Get out of bed, get on with your duty, and appreciate what is around you. That is the meaning of life. The goal of education, he believed, was to enable people to understand their duty, to find their assigned tasks, and to perform them to the best of their abilities. He found great comfort in basically having goals, having a responsibility, bearing his cross, accepting the responsibility to be a better person. And what I like in here is he says, and appreciate what is around you. Gratitude. I think gratitude is one of the greatest, that is the healing balm of all to me. It's the protector of your soul, of your character, of your being. The more grateful you are for what you have and the world you live in, and it's hard to feel sorry for yourself, and it's hard to wallow in misery when you're deeply grateful. Instead of, it's the old saying, instead of the glass half full or half empty, it's half full. It's looking at it and saying, hey, I say this often. If you're not happy right now in the financial situation that you're in, more money will not change it.
Agreed.
Especially in the modern world we live in today. Mm-hmm. More money will not change your happiness. And so that's an eye-opener for many to sit there and go, wait a minute, I thought if I had this job, this thing, and this contract, and this deal come through, and I got this raise, then I'll be happy then. I'll have more money, and then things will be fixed. And the truth is, if you're not happy now, more money won't change it, because it turns out that it takes very, very little in a human being's life in the way of needs being met to be happy. Mm-hmm. So, for example, on the mountain, when I'm out there for 2 weeks, barely eating, I'm happier than I am in most phases of my life. Under the most stringent of discomforts, the highest degree of discomforts, and in the greatest degree of lack of food and the most fatigue. And yet I'm among my happiness. You can look at it in countries where people are poverty stricken and yet are very happy. I was talking to Mom the other day, and she's like, well, I remember back when gas was nearly $5 a gallon. And I remember when, Jimmy Carter was president and things were really, really bad.
Mom has the newspaper from the day I was born, and it says gas prices skyrocket to 99 cents a gallon.
Exactly. She said that, she's been talking to a few people, and she said, being dirt poor is different. It's not better. It's not worse necessarily. It's different. She's like, because my parents had me when they were, our parents had me when they were 16, 17 years old. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have any money because teenagers don't have money. And I grew up in a trailer, little tiny trailer, or a tent for a while on some property, some land out in the middle of nowhere in Oregon City. And then we graduated from the tent to a little tiny trailer, and then like a little like 15 footer. And then we graduated from that into a mobile home. And I felt like that was a castle, you know. And as we progressed, as I got older, and my parents began to build wealth, and now they have a lot of wealth, right? But just like young people do, they had nothing. And I grew up in that environment, and we had rice and we had beans, and we were never hungry.
I like rice and beans.
We had a lot of it. And, you know, we made homemade bread. My parents would go to the church cannery and make chili and beef stew. And I ate a lot of canned chili and stew.
Tang? Did you guys get Tang?
We had orange Tang. It tastes like that McDonald's orange juice, like back from the day. And anyway, we grew up like that, and we had property. And in that sense, we were rich. We had forest
location,
land.
For sure.
Yeah.
Grew up in a beautiful place.
We had crawdads in the creek and deer on the property and frogs to catch and places to roam. And I had a very, very idyllic, like I felt like beautiful childhood. I didn't have. I had old shoes with holes in them, and I had
which
pants
you
that
forewent most of the time, anyways.
Didn't, you know? I had clothes that we bought that were hand me down. Never got new stuff, and I never was want really at the end of the day, because what I had was enough. Like my happiness wasn't based actually on possessions and material wealth. And I feel that we've been brainwashed, our society and our culture and modern man today has been brainwashed to believe that it's material wealth that brings all of this contentment and happiness and relief to one's life. And that's a lie. It's a big lie.
I feel there's a lot of lies. Once you get the job, you'll be happy. If you get the girl, you'll be happy. If you have enough money, you'll be happy. When you get the house, you'll be happy. Happiness doesn't come from without. It comes from within.
This Stoic philosophy by Marcus Aurelius, you know, he's out there saying, you know, I'm embracing my duty. He said, if someone is super annoying and they do really, really annoying things and they get in your way and they're in your life, you shouldn't hate that person. In fact, you know, you should love that person because they come from the same God that you come from, and that they have intrinsic divine value. They have a spark of divinity. And in that regard, you should basically love everyone best you can. It's a challenge. That's a challenge to undertake. Can you give people grace and let them annoy you or have them be in your life and you not hate them or you know, it's you know the you know the old saying like love your enemies, bless them that hate you. That's hard to do. It doesn't mean get abused by them either, but you can defend yourself against someone while also having compassion for them. I don't think it's easy.
No, but on that line of gratitude, back to the beginning of this conversation, honestly, Brian, there's times in my life where that's the only thing I really have to turn to. You know, when you're in your darkest dark, gratitude is the only thing I've ever found that I can use to chisel my way out of that darkness.
You know, I think I'm brought back to the words that were written by Viktor Frankl when he was in the heart of Auschwitz, you know, and he talks about digging a hole there and contemplating his beloved, you know, his wife.
Yeah.
And he's digging that hole, and he didn't know at that time she had already been gassed in the chambers, but
like 2 years prior almost.
But he envisioned her and the times that they had together, and he had a moment of bliss and gratitude and thankfulness. And he said in that moment, he realized that love transcends all the pain and sorrow that he was facing. That the beauty, that there's absolute beauty and there's absolute love, and that transcends everything else. And that even in that place, under those conditions, he found a peace in his soul and acceptance of existence. And he found meaning in his suffering. that in spite of them taking everything, and basically what he did was he, like Marcus Aurelius says, he woke up, got out of bed, accepted his duty, his fate, and then in the bounds of that duty, he did what he could, best he could, to make the world a better place, despite, the limitations on what he could actually do.
I love that sentence, finding meaning in his suffering. Because sometimes you go through things and it doesn't feel like anything good could possibly ever come from it. But then every time in my life I look back, I can easily point and say, X, Y, and Z came out of this and they made me better. Or that this was the reason why. But when you're in the middle of it, it's so hard to go through a trial with grace.
Goes back to the gratitude thing. Because if in that trial, someone has cancer that you love, and it might be fatal, but when you're focused on, rather than what you're losing, you're focused on what you have and what you have had, it changes everything. When Suzanne had cancer, I went through this battle internally where I was bitter over it. But then later, I realized that my anger and my bitterness was robbing me of the joy that I had in the past and what I had in the future ahead of me. And so I realized, like, you could be consumed
easily
by that bitterness.
Easily.
And instead I realized, well, had I known that she'd get cancer and possibly pass away, let's say she did die, I had come to the realization that I wouldn't have changed anything.
Not a damn
because
thing.
I loved every minute of what we had, and I wouldn't have traded her out for something else or someone else that lived a much longer life. Like not a moment would I have traded.
I think that's Brian, because like he's saying, like that's your life. That's your duty. Like I've had things happen to me a lot recently. I'm not super thrilled with how my life's turned out the last 6 months. I wouldn't change it.
I think that is an acceptance of gratitude, right? Like you sit there and you go, I realize, like with Suzanne, okay, I wouldn't trade her out. I wouldn't switch anything. I would accept her death. I would trade what we had. I would accept the destiny for what I got to have up until that moment. I would easily say, yes, I will spend these 10 years, 15 years with her and know that she's gone at the end of that, than never to have experienced it at all.
Agreed.
And when you take it one step further and you say, let's say that Suzanne had succumbed to cancer and I lost my wife, I still had 3 daughters who are my joy, right? So I still have these 3 girls, and I look at the time that is there that would be robbed, the time that I could spend with them doing great things in gratitude, that would be robbed if I were
bitter,
to allow myself to be bitter and consumed by resentment. And so by accepting, like putting it in God's hands, for lack of a better way to put it, and saying, okay, I'll do it your way. And then just being grateful for what I've had and looking forward to what I've got now in front of me and being grateful for the what I still have. It allows me to live life to the fullest extent because I'm letting go. I'm trusting in fate or in God, and I'm working on giving the rest to those moments and times that are still here with the people that truly matter to me, right? I say this all the time, the secret to a happy life is to accept your responsibility, and there is no substitute for living a moral life. Now, it's impossible to be perfect, as Christians say, the only perfect man is Christ, right? So you're doomed from day one. You're flawed. I'm flawed. We're doomed. We're not perfect. We're going to have all these problems, but
we seek progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And that and in that journey is purpose and meaning. And in that process of striving to live a moral life, there's meaning. It's hard.
Yes.
But what better cross could you bear while you're here than to strive to be a morally good person?
You know, James Allen, in his book As a Man Thinketh, he says pretty much that every situation you find yourself in is there for one of two reasons. It is either to correct improper thinking or reinforce proper thinking. For what need hath gold of refinement if it is pure?
Yeah. Your thoughts are powerful things.
Very.
I mean,
you can manifest whatever you want, folks. That stuff's real.
Thoughts are powerful. You just read some books from some great from some people who have gone through it, and
or just YouTube Wim Hof. That dude just mentals his way through things. Dude.
So, very true. So anyway, that's our discussion on Marcus Aurelius Meditations. This is just kind of a summary. I thought for those who want to read the book and get into more of it, you can, but this kind of gives you an idea. I truly, truly like this part here where he says, truth is an absolute value. Some things are true in all places and times. Absolute truth. Truth is an absolute value. I think there's absolute beauty, and I think there's absolute truth. I don't think that's relative. I think there's a fixed law of what is true and what is not true. That means there is no your truth and my truth. Doesn't exist.
Makes me cringe. I hate that. Tell me your truth. I want to hear that. Tell me the lie you tell yourself every day.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it as well. And that stuff is bothersome. So to stand up for truth is not easy. It's not easy because, especially in a world today, the world is working really hard to make everything relative and subjective, and to disassociate absolute truth from truth, to undermine it, to say, well, that's just how you see it. Like when someone says to me, like my kids in school, when the teacher says, some kids are born and they're assigned a male gender at birth, and some are assigned a female gender at birth,
according to their genitalia. Weird.
And how
foreign.
And but that's wrong. And sometimes someone who's really a boy is assigned a girl, and No, a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl. And gender is just it's, to me, like sex is pretty clear. And there's evolutionary and biological ties to that are irrefutable. And gender is just what you think in your head, or what someone decides to think in their head. And that is not an objective truth.
No.
And too often we have now supplanted truth with feelings. And whatever someone's feelings are, those triumph reality. And there's an onslaught of attack on reality in the world today. And I'm all about freedom and liberty and people to do what they want. And I don't care how another person lives their life in general, as long as they're not dangerous and infringing on others. I'm a big John Stuart Mill fan of liberty, and it's in this all sense of that, those terms. What I can't deal with is when you try to tell me that the sky is red when it's blue. The truth is truth, and if as people we don't stand up for it, the world falls apart. It's chaos.
Winston Churchill has this quote about making enemies. He says, "You have enemies? Good. That means you stood up for something in your life."
Yeah.
So go out there and make some enemies, folks.
That's right. That wasn't really the goal of this, but
to summarize this podcast, make enemies.
Anyway, so I hope that gets you thinking, folks. Some ideas out there. And Brent, the next book we're going to read, there's a couple, but we're going to get back to the River of Doubt. If you've missed those, go check those out. But I really enjoy doing these things with Brent, and Brent's going to be around a little more, having these kind of conversations with us. And we'll be putting those out on the podcast. It's not really like 10 ways to kill a bull elk. This is a lot different, but we really enjoy it. And so we're going to keep bringing it. And it seems like there's a huge part of the audience that does too. So thanks for the conversation. Thanks for hanging out with us for the conversation. And like we said, if you like what we're doing, like the show, like and subscribe, leave us a comment, review, all that kind of stuff, and use the codes that support our platform. Every time you guys use the code at Mountain Ops or Stealthy or Peaks or you name it, we get a commission for that, and it helps us keep doing what we do, and you get a discount on what you're buying, and it's a win for everybody. I really like the way that this works out. And that's it for today. Thanks for all your support, and stay gritty.